Greetings to our honored guests, members of our diplomatic community, and friends from around the world. We are so happy to have you here with us today as we launch our spring 2022 edition and celebrate the 1-year anniversary of A Seat at the Table, Women in Global Leadership webinar series. My name is Maureen Pace, and I am the CEO of the World Trade Center, Dublin, Ireland, and also serve as Vice President of the Drew Company. Over the past year, thousands of women have taken a seat here at the table and joined us for intimate and invaluable conversations. This series, we have heard from inspirational women leaders who have showcased their unique and sometimes unconventional experiences in diplomacy, international business, trade, and culture. These leaders have offered us timely insights and have all echoed a common theme that women are essential for driving economic growth and social change in their communities, countries, and around the world. This program and series we present to you has been inspired by author Susan Sloan and her book, A Seat at the Table, Women, Diplomacy, and Lessons for the World. Returning as our esteemed moderator, Susan captures personal perspectives and experiences from our dynamic guest speakers on their successes, overcoming challenges, and their amazing journeys to their leading posts. Susan is an author, speaker, diplomacy advocate, and just all-around vibrant woman. She holds a master's degree in global strategic communications from Georgetown University and graduated magna cum laude. Before I turn it over to begin our program, I would like to express how pleased I am to be here as a partner representing the World Trade Center, Dublin, Ireland, in collaboration with the World Trade Center, Washington, D.C. I want to thank you all for joining us today and hope that you will enjoy what I am absolutely certain is going to be a fascinating conversation. So without further ado, I turn it over to you, Susan. Thank you.
Thanks, Maureen. Good to be with everyone. Hello, friends, and welcome back. I'm Susan Sloan, and you have a seat at the table. A special thank you to the Ronald Reagan Building, the World Trade Center in Washington, D.C., and Dublin, and TCMA for creating this amazing series. And for the magic makers who are behind the screen doing what they do, thank you. I know who you are, and you know who you are. In this series, you've heard from global leaders who have a seat at the table. And yes, have no fear if you've missed any of these conversations or you have to drop out early today. All of the conversations are recorded and posted on YouTube at the Ronald Reagan Building YouTube channel. As everyone knows, and if you're new, if you don't know, submit your questions into the Q&A function of Zoom. I will be taking your questions live. I really look at them, I really read them, I really ask them. Put your questions in there. We want to know what you're asking and what you're thinking. Now, if you're going to be on social media today, please use the hashtag Seat at the Table and the hashtag Where Leaders Lead. You can find us at Reagan IT CDC and at Real Susan Sloan. Have this conversation with us online. This series is based on my book, A Seat at the Table, Women, Diplomacy, and Lessons for the World. And from east to west, north to south, women are changing the world. And as we know, statistics and data, they're not going to solve gender diversity and gender parity. We need these personal stories, and we need to understand the why and what we can do to change the system. And that is why I'm honored to introduce you to our speaker today. Our honored guest is the president and CEO of the Corporate Council on Africa, Flory Lisser. She's the first woman to lead the council since its founding in 1993. She has served as the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Africa and many other high-level trade and policy positions. Now, what's her educational background? I'm glad you asked. She has a master's in international economics from Johns Hopkins University, as we call it, SAIS, and a bachelor's in international relations and political science from Dickinson College. And now, all of you can find that information online, but here's what you won't find in her bio. She's an immigrant from Panama. She immigrated into the United States at the age of 2 in the 1950s. She grew up in Brooklyn, and her family did not have a car, and a family of 5, and she was the middle child. She went to college at the age of 17. She's also a mother of 2. Now, this woman has got many stories. So, Flory, We are glad to have you at the table.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, and thank you to Maureen and Jan and Allison. It's good to be here. I'm so honored that I would be one of the women with a seat at the table. Susan, I've been listening to your book on audiobook and enjoying so much the stories of, such remarkable women. And I'm just honored to be here today and look forward to having a chat with you and sharing what I hope will be inspirational to other women and men. We won't leave them out as
Yes,
well.
everyone.
Yes.
Well, great. Let's kick it off. Tell us about your upbringing and family and how your upbringing as a child, as a young adult, helped shape who the leader you are today.
Well, thank you. When I moved to the U.S. with my parents were born in Panama themselves, of immigrants to Panama who helped build the canal. So from Antigua and Barbados, and we came to the US after my parents saved for many years. We moved in, as many immigrants do, with family at first. And it was instilled in my brother and I. We were born in Panama. My sister, she was born in the US. We call her Pan American. But it was instilled in us that we could do anything, that we were here in the US, we could have the best education, we could have a wonderful life, and that all we had to do was apply ourselves and be the best that we could in whatever it was that was put before us. And my family, myself, people of faith, we went to church every Sunday. I was in the children's choir. I was in the youth fellowship group. It was never questioned about that. And all three of us, we were raised, we went to college, we have advanced degrees. And that was like—
Which is no small feat. I mean, that's a big deal.
Yes, it was. And I just give a lot of credit to my parents. Again, typical immigrant, story though, we always had other family members who were living with us. I was 16 before it was just us in the house. There were always people, cousins and aunties and, others who were also in the process of moving to the US. But the theme in the entire family, including the extended family, was that we could do anything and be anything in the US.
And you proved it. So that's good. So that's a little bit about your background, and something that when we were having our pre-conversation that I really listened and heard is that education has really defined your way to get to be a leader. And something you said that really resonated with me is that education defines the quality of life you can get. Tell us about that and how education has shaped your life and how it can shape others' lives.
So, I lived in the Bushwick, Bed-Stuy part of Brooklyn, not the best area, but interestingly, we didn't actually know, the kids didn't know that we were a bit deprived economically, but not deprived in so many other important ways. And so my parents understood that the local schools, the one that were in our neighborhood, were not the best schools. So they found all sorts of ways to make sure that all three of us went to schools outside of our neighborhoods, which meant that from the age of about 8, I started taking public transportation. They didn't have those big yellow school buses in New York, not in Brooklyn anyway. And so I started taking public transportation to school at the age of 8 and did that, all the way until I went off to college. And I just remember on the point of education and grades, if I brought home, let me talk about me, if I brought home a report card with 6 A's and 1 B, my dad would sit me down and he would say, okay, so what happened here? Why is this a B? And I'd be like, but Dad, I have 6 A's. No, he wanted to know why I did not have all A's. So, in my family, that was an expectation. You had to come home with good grades. You had no excuses, and you were expected to do all your homework, all your assignments. and also participate and be a leader in your church activities and your community activities. So my dad was an activist. He made sure both, whatever he was doing, he had us out there doing it with him. So again, the whole point of education from my parents' perspective was that was the avenue to success in the United States.
And it wasn't the easiest neighborhood, right? You mentioned to me about your father and brother being mugged multiple times.
Well, you don't want to talk about these things, but yeah, my dad was mugged 3 times, and you know, how can I put it? In neighborhoods like that, certain people may look like they have more than you, but maybe they don't really have much more than you in terms of resources, but they have a lot more in other things. And so my dad was a man who carried himself a certain way. I think that, some of those young guys out there might have thought he had more than he had. And so unfortunately, he did experience that on a couple of occasions. And once my brother was also mugged. So but that's the downside. We don't want to talk about the down things, because there were so many wonderful things that happened growing up in that neighborhood and in Brooklyn, and in my particular home in Brooklyn. And so
And I think that goes to the perseverance of family, though, that even with sometimes even a mugging or something in the neighborhood, the fact that your parents instilled this level of resilience and value in education and closeness and tight-knit family, that shows that family, one, is very important no matter where you are in the world. And I've seen from interviewing many different women that really their core of family and partnership helps with resiliency and allows them to have a bedrock to become a leader.
Yeah, no, I think that family is really, really critical, and the support that you get from families. And I think, it may be sort of in the olden days, it was expected that, men who had demanding positions, and they would have, thankfully, they would have wives who were very supportive and took care of things. When you reverse that, though, for women, it wasn't always necessarily the case that women had the kind of support that they needed. But I just know from my own experience, I've always had a very supportive family, a very supportive extended family. I have lots and lots of cousins. I was just talking to some of them over this past weekend. Whenever I travel, I have family members who will check on me. Are you okay? Are you back from Morocco safely? Wherever I go, they're checking on me. So family is important. And, I've always told people, when people ask me, well, how are you doing, Claire? I said, well, I am doing fine. I am juggling all the balls of life, trying not to drop the glass ones. And I just say to people that family is always a glass ball for me. Mm-hmm. And I encourage women, especially young women I meet who are early in their careers, demanding careers, with young kids and husbands and, partners and so forth. I always say, make sure that you take care of the glass balls in your life. Because if you drop those, you can't easily put them back together. The ones that are rubber, they'll bounce, they'll go over in a corner. You can pick them back up later on, dust them off and start bouncing them again. But I do think that family is certainly a glass ball, and I encourage all women, young, old. I'm old now, but
you are not old, my friend.
Well, well, I don't know about that.
Now, for the crowd to know, this amazing woman is about to be 70. So happy early birthday. And here you are vibrantly working. What can you share with us about working as a seasoned professional and to other women who are more seasoned professionals out there?
Well, this is an area I think everyone should really be focused on. My very best friend in the world, Elizabeth Diane White, you all can look her up. She's written several books, and she talks about what's happened to a lot of senior workers, but especially women. When we had the first downturn in the economy in the 90s, and a lot of seasoned workers, very experienced people, lost jobs, weren't able to get picked up easily like the younger folks, and found themselves in very, very difficult circumstances at a time in life where you figure, okay, I've done what I was supposed to do. I went to Harvard, I went to Yale, I went to SAIS, I've done this, that, and the other. And now, here I am, unemployed and not, living up to my capabilities. But I do think that there should be, and I think we see little hints of it, an appreciation for what seasoned people bring to the table. But I think institutionally, this country has a lot more that it really needs to do in terms of how it provides a safety net for and takes advantage of and leverages the incredible thing that older people bring to the table, especially women. Because you showed the figures earlier, Susan, but let's be honest. Companies that have women, they're more profitable. This is not you just doing something to be nice, getting women on your board and having women CEOs and CFOs and COOs. This is about making money and being profitable, and having women in those leadership positions means that you will be more profitable. But, we also talk about the things women bring to the table, that seat at the table where, we are more likely to be understanding of our staff members and their needs, to be more flexible about how we are responsive to those needs. There's just so many things that women bring to the table. So again, young or old or in between, I would just say that today it's an imperative, really, to have women in leadership positions. And we see a lot of that now. I could do a shout out to a lot of women right now. But I do want to say that, in the Biden administration, that happens to have the first, woman, African-American vice president, and then, all these incredible women that work in the Biden administration in key positions. And if I start naming names, I could go on forever.
Oh, don't name names.
Yeah, but I do want to just say generally a shout out to all of those women who are in leadership positions. And then in another area, almost 40 women ambassadors to the United States. You could not be in a more a significant and powerful position than to represent your country to the United States of America, right?
100%.
And to think that we have almost 40 ambassadors, women ambassadors, and I'm delighted that I have met a number of them. There was this wonderful event, Jan and I saw each other there, that was hosted by the ambassador of Rwanda. And, just so many incredible women ambassadors that were at that. It was a holiday event. And just being able to take off our hats to them. These are indeed women who have a seat at the table.
And switching topics, right now, we have a seat at the computer. We're in a pandemic. Yeah. We're still seeing how it goes. Many places are still having masks and different situations going on. Tell us about how you see the work and the work world changing because of the pandemic, and how has the impact of the pandemic been in your work with Africa?
Well, so, this is one of those things where, they say you make lemonade out of lemons, and, there's a silver lining behind every cloud. I wasn't getting there so much in the beginning. We had a great event, our US Africa Business Summit. It's our signature event that we do every year. We were going to have it in Morocco in June of 2020. So needless to say, we had to pull that down. And as an organization, I think many of you on here know CCA. We are a leading business association that's focused solely on enhancing US Africa trade and investment and commercial engagement. And so to not be able to hold our summit, that was a huge deal for us. but then on top of that, not to be able to convene. We are, incredible conveners. We bring together government and private sector, US and African. And so the impact of the pandemic on CCA was that we immediately had to transition to convening virtually. And we did many, many sessions, during the pandemic. We had one on economic recovery coming out of the pandemic. We hosted, 6 African heads of state at our 2021 US Africa Business Summit. Like, we were amazed. We had 6 of them. We had 5 people who are cabinet officials from the Biden administration. And then we had probably about 2,000 folks who joined us virtually. But, it's not the same. I mean, let's be honest. And I don't know about you all. I'm enjoying this session, but I am zoomed out, ladies. I am tired of talking to people virtually and looking in cameras and all of that. And so we have started now transitioning back into the office. I just got back from Morocco. It was my first trip to Africa in over 2 years. And so, everyone is anxious to open back up. Countries, in fact, are opening back up all around the world. And businesses are relaunching, and in some cases, though, the result of the pandemic is that people are being more creative about what they do and how they do it, and so this is a great time, I think, to grab back some of the old, which has served us well, but to also pivot to the new. It's just, this is a great time to do that. And we at CCA, that's what we're doing. We're having hybrid events, where we have maybe 20 or 30 people in a room. So we can see each other. We can bump elbows if we can't shake hands, but we can also have people join us from all around the world. And I think we have to basically embrace some of the new things that have happened as a result of the pandemic. But I think we shouldn't forget some of the tried and true, because people, we're social beings. We like to see each other. We like to hug. We like to shake hands. And
that's a very culturally important thing in Africa.
Absolutely.
Face to face and to build trust. I find that especially in diplomacy, face-to-face diplomacy cannot be used on online diplomacy. They're very different. And culturally speaking, in Africa, it sounds like many different cultures within this continent, they need that face-to-face interaction to even build the trust to do business.
Oh, yes. No, and I think that, I want to give a shout out to Africa for the way that they managed what was not only a health challenge, but also, an economic challenge. The impact on Africa in terms of closing down economies, you think about the informal markets and connections in Africa, trying to shut all of that down. This was incredible. And I just give a lot of credit to them, the leadership at the AU that, stood up the African medical supplies platform. The Africans weren't able to get, PPE and access to vaccines. And it really was with the leadership of the AU and, President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was the chair last year, Strive Masayiwa, who was tapped to help with that, along with people like Vera Sangwe, another incredible woman leader, who's the Secretary General of UNECA. It was people like that who really made, a difference in Africa in terms of how they have weathered both the health impact of the COVID pandemic, but also the economic impact. And so, that's something that we have to do. And we have to also talk about the partners they had. And, I thought the USG was a good partner, but the private sector was also a good partner. Both US and African members of CCA, we have both stepped up and did a lot to provide support to African countries and people. So, I'm very proud of that. I didn't personally have anything to do with that, but I'm proud that members of CCA both our African and US members stepped up and said, we're going to do our part.
And there were a lot of acronyms just flown around. I want to let you know that AU does not mean American University. It means the African Union. If you have any questions about the acronyms, put it in the chat. I see a few questions coming in, so we are going to ask them live. We have a question coming in from Michelle Bond, no relation to James Bond. She agrees that family is important at success at every age. However, many children are not lucky enough to be born into a family equipped to love, encourage, and support, and to push them to do their best. Now, some have access to others who can substitute or supplement, such as a religious institution or at school. However, in your opinion, what are examples of critical resources that should be available in every community, town, state to support these children and their parents?
Well, that's a very, very good question. One of the things that's happened during the pandemic that made it very clear that there was going to be a divide here was what happened to children who could have access to telelearning. They could get, Chromebooks and iPads and, other things that they needed to be able and had access to the internet, to be able to continue getting their learning and continue their education. And so, sadly, in Africa, there were lots of places where, children have lost a year or 2 years of learning because they did not have access to the equipment that was needed. They did not have access to the internet. But, if I could just make this point as well, there are children in the United States who got lost over the last 2 years as well. And so, some coming from disadvantaged homes where either they didn't get the Chromebooks or they got Chromebooks and then the Chromebooks were sort of misappropriated. And so those children were lost to the systems here, even in the United States. So I would just say, in answer to her question, we have to make sure that children, especially girls, I want to talk about that for a moment, have access to education, primary education, secondary, and beyond. This is really, really critical, and that people who don't have the resources don't end up deciding that, okay, well, I'll send my boy children to school, but my girl children, they have to stay at home. No, we don't want that. And the world doesn't need that. We need to make sure that our female children are being educated around the world. So yes, access to good teachers and everything that's associated with education. Because as I said, for me and my family, education was the key. That's how we got to do the things we did. That's how I'm blessed to be in the position that I'm in now.
100%. And folks, a reminder, throw your questions into the Q&A. We are asking them live. A different topic and question for you. It's about your bosses and supervisors that you've had over your career. How have those people supported you or maybe not supported you? And what do you say to all those bosses and supervisors and managers out there of what they can do for their team members?
Well, my career goes like way back, right? So I got out of grad school in 1975. So anything I say is also, a bit jaded because it goes a ways back. So over that very long period, 4 decades or more, I think that in my earlier years, my mentors tended to be men, white men, older white men. Let's just put it out there. They were great. And I appreciated that, and probably would not have gotten into different positions had it not been for them. And so earlier on in my career, white males were very important. As my career advanced, though, there were women who were supervisors. There were some who were not great. There were some who didn't see my doing well as a way to help them do well. But I was also very fortunate that, towards the latter years of my career, in government. I was actually brought back to USTR by Susan Esserman, Ambassador Susan Esserman. My predecessor in the Africa job, Rosa Whitaker, she played a key role in my being able to move into that position. Josette Shiner, who was also a deputy USTR, she was, really critical in mentoring me. She's had so many different jobs over the years, head of the WFP, head of the Asia Society. She's moved on.
I'm going to interrupt you for one moment. When you say they were very good at mentoring you, tell us about something you remember from these different folks. And I know Ambassador Susan Esserman. I know she's an amazing woman. She's also mentored me. So tell us something that they maybe sat down and told you, hey, Flori, do this, or hey, Flori, don't do this.
Right. So I want to use two examples of mentoring, one from a man and one from a woman. So in my from 2000 to 2003, I was in the position of assistant USTR for industry and telecommunications. And in the role of industry, we had what was called a 201 on steel at the time. And what that meant was that we were blocking other people's steel from coming into the US to support our own steel industry. And I would go to meetings with Ambassador Zellick. Bob Zellick was great. He's the one who made me the ouster for Africa, as a matter of fact. And I would be not only the only female in the room, the only person of color in the room. So you can imagine, all these, big meetings with all these steel people. And this was all around the world, Korea, Japan, China. I visited more steel mills than I ever want to talk about ever. But often in those meetings, I was the only woman, the only person of color. And I remember being in a really high-level meeting with Ambassador Zellick on steel with steel CEOs, and someone came all the way around the table to me to basically ask me if I could get them coffee. And I was sitting next to the ambassador, passing him notes and so forth. And so I was taken a little off guard. I looked up in this person, and so I was like, what? And so he was speaking, and he actually heard the man asking that I should get up and go get him some coffee. And I tell you, Bob Zellick said, oh, no, Flori does not do that. You need to find somebody else. He stopped in the middle of his, no, she doesn't do that. No, you go find somebody else who's going to do that. And that person sort of sheepishly, moved off and so forth. But, in terms of women, we talked about Sue Esserman. She, encouraged me and, in the role in Africa. We took a trip to South Africa together, just really super supportive. Ambassador Shiner, she was my superior and supervisor when we were negotiating the US South Africa Southern Africa Customs Union FTA. It never concluded, unfortunately, but for 3 years we were negotiating an FTA with that group. And Josette was really incredible, but she also pushed me to, be tough. And she, as well as other women supervisors of mine, also showed me that as a woman, you could be tough, but you could also still be feminine. You didn't have to pretend that you were a guy. You didn't have to try to dress like one. You didn't try to have to act like one. You didn't try to have to be, a bee at the table, but that you could be tough. You could be, really a sharp negotiator. But you didn't have to pretend that you were a man. You didn't have to do it in a way that the men would do it. And I think that's one of the main lessons that I learned from the women who were my mentors, especially later in my career where I had even more senior positions. And so I think that was good. But I also thank all the men who mentored me along the way, including folks who didn't let other men take advantage of me.
I mean, it's so true. I think you find throughout one's career, and many folks in the audience can probably attest this as well. Sometimes you don't realize you're in a learning moment and that you're learning from somebody. And sometimes you're learning how you want to be a good manager. And sometimes you're learning from a poor manager how you don't want to do that. But I find that, yes, I'm glad that your boss stood up for you and said, she doesn't get the coffee. Okay. I think that's important to have someone's back, and that's part of being a good colleague, 100%. And this next question comes from Dr. Stan Sloan. There may be a relation there to myself. What was the most significant challenge you faced in your career, and how did you overcome it?
Ooh, well, I think, so since I've been an African American woman all my life, over the years, there have been different times that, to be honest, it's been a challenge. I think that especially when I was leading like U.S. delegations to meetings for many years, I headed we had the APEC working group, and there was a transportation working group. This is my days at DOT. And we would, I would be leading a delegation of very senior US government people from a number of agencies. And what would happen is that in those meetings, sometimes people would come and they would tend to go to my colleagues, especially white males, to ask them, what should we do about this or that issue? And even in some meetings, I would be completely ignored. I'm sitting there, I'm the head of delegation, but I'd be completely ignored while they address their attention and also their eyes to the men in the room. And so, I would sit there sometimes just like waiting to see, like, was there going to be an opportunity for me to do what I was there to do? And sometimes I'd have to push my way into those conversations. Kind of tough, but sometimes you'd have to like really just like, okay, well, let me speak to that issue. As the head of the US delegation, our position on this is, but other times I would sit there, and what would happen, which also was a testament to some of the great men that I worked with who were junior to me, would be, you need to direct this to Flory. She's, Miss Lazier, she's the one who can speak to that issue. I can't answer that question. That's above my pay grade. You need to talk to Flory. And so you're like, oh, okay. And then, they'd have sometimes these puzzled looks on their faces. They'd be a little bit like, what? Her? we had to talk to her about this issue. But often, as you were able to basically show that you were capable, that you were qualified, that you were prepared, because just because you're qualified doesn't mean that you're prepared. I always tell my team now, they laugh when I say it, do your homework. Don't go into any meeting unless you've done your homework. And so, I'd be prepared and then able to do well. And so, I've had the opportunity, I've testified on the Hill many, many times. I've, given keynote addresses here and there. And I've just always been, blessed that even for today, last night, one of the last things I was doing was listening to your book, because I thought,
which is a good thing to do right before you go to bed. You can listen to my voice.
Well, I won't say that it put me to sleep, but I thought,
I hope not.
It was, because also it's your voice as well, Susan. And so, some audiobooks don't have the voice of the author, but you owned it because it was your voice in your book, right? So,
yes.
But it just, to me, that's just one small example of, you're going to do something, do your best. Excellence is really required, and you really have to bring your A game every time.
And this is something that's come up in the book quite a bit about preparation and that really leads everyone to success, whether it's men or women, how you prepare,
Absolutely.
how you have the conversation before the conversation. And it's something that, in essence, when people wonder how people are successful, oftentimes it's preparation.
Absolutely.
Tell us about your ethos or mantra as a CEO. What is something that calls to you consistently and that you hear echoing in your head?
Well, it's really, again, this whole point of excellence. I mean, everyone has to define that for themselves, right? And so if you think of it as I could do a B or a B plus and it would be fine, but I really want to strive to be, an A here. And, I talked about bringing your A game, but I really do think that every time we have an opportunity in whatever area of our lives, if we say to ourselves, I want to be my absolute best. And for me, because of my faith, it's like I'm empowered, my faith and my God empowers me to do my best. And I just feel like that's, a way that I honor him. That's a way that I honor my own life. And sometimes it's not that you're doing it for the other people. You're not being your best for somebody else. You're being your best because that's what you're called to do. That's what's going to make you feel good about yourself. That's how you're going to be able to look at yourself in the mirror every day and say, did I do my best? And like I said, my staff, who is incredible. I have this small team of people at CCA. We do so many things. People think we're huge, but we literally have like 10 people total at CCA. And, just an incredible group of people, many of whom are young diaspora Africans working, in this field. And I always say to them, if I don't do my best at something, and they'll tell you this, I'll say, I wasn't my best today at that, I apologize, because I feel like it's my responsibility to bring my A game to every single thing that I do. And so that's really it. I also have a saying that I like. I keep it here. I have a Post-it I keep here, and it says, "Where you sit when you're old reflects where you stood when you were young." And so
repeat that again. Let me hear that again.
So where you sit when you're old reflects where you stood when you were young. So that's about your values, your value system, what you stand on, when you're younger, and the principles and the values that you reflect and defend, that is going to impact where you go in your life. And when you're a really old woman, I'll be 70 soon.
You're not a really old woman.
Really old, but
you're not old.
Well, I'll just tell you this. I have an auntie who is, she was 102 when she died in December. So, my mom died at 94. 3 of my 4 grandparents died when they were 96. So I'm hoping I have many more years before I have to say that I'm like really old. But I do think that the things and the principles on which we stand when we're younger and as we go through life will really be reflected at the end of our lives, where we're sitting then will be a reflection of all of those values that we were true to, that we were faithful to all along in our lives.
That really resonates with me, and I'm sure it resonates with the audience, this idea of where you stand and what you stand for. And as we're making decisions throughout our lives and our careers, are we doing that with integrity, with honesty, with respect, with compassion and love? And so, yes, I say yes, and that's wonderful. And we have another question from the audience. Gregory Simpkins asks, over your career, to what extent do you feel women have become more accepted in leadership positions by men of all races? And are some ethnic groups still resistant to accepting women as leaders?
Well, Greg, I know Greg Simpkins from way back, great gentleman who has been doing a lot of work on Africa for a long time and in different places. Greg, shout out to you. So that's an excellent question. I do think that women of color still are at a disadvantage. You know, when you look at, I don't know all the numbers, and maybe I should have looked it up last night, but you know, if a man makes $1, then you know a white male makes $1 for a job, and then you know then it'll be you know white women, you know, women of color come after that. So women of color often still are not paid what they should be paid. And that's, I think that's something that really still needs to be addressed. I have a feeling we're going to have to continue doing that, you know, forever. And even when women are put in the same positions, so you have the title, you have, you know, that you know, you're the, you know, senior VP for whatever. But then you find out that the senior VPs in other parts of your institution actually are earning more than you, or they have benefits that you don't have. And you think, now, why would that be? So even when organizations will provide sort of the cover of being equal, that if you go a little bit below that, you'll find out that it's still not equal. But Greg, I think that it is, I think, getting better. I think that there is more acceptance of women leaders, of African-American women leaders, but I think that we can't relax at this point because we are not there, let's be honest. And, you know, you also see that I think if people can sort of tell themselves that everything is fine and we don't have to address this issue anymore, you know, there is equity and there is, you know, racial equality, then people will say, well, we're done with that. And so now we don't have to focus on it. But I think there's some things that we should be committed to for life, right? We should all be committed to for life. And I think that equity and equality and respect for all people and what they bring is something that each of us can honor and do something about.
100%, 100%. And going on that note, what's something that you have learned professionally that you really haven't told many people? Tell us one of your secrets. And I'll go.
So you know, well, so
that.
one of the
Suzette
things.
asked in the chat, any special advice for young Black women? So it can be a double edge.
Yes. Well, so I think that so I think that for young Black women, you know, I hate to say it, but you're going to have to outperform. You're going to have to outperform. I was going to say outmaneuver, but I actually don't want to say that. Outperform your colleagues around you, whoever they may be. It could be men, it could be women, it could be Black, it could be white, you know, or other. You have to outperform, because I think that the standards for what people are willing to do with and for us are still higher. It's like you have to, the benchmark is higher, the goalposts are higher, even when people don't recognize that. And so I would just say, again, you know, do your absolute best. And then if you know you've done that, then stand on that. But I would also say something that it took me a long time to really get this. And there are parts of me now that still are not comfortable with it, but you have to be willing to embrace kind of, this is who I am and this is what I want. And I think women everywhere have issues with this, but I know I in particular, you know, have always had trouble with asking for what I want, what I think I should have, because something about it struck me as either inappropriate or, whatever. But I'll just use this one example. When I was in my early years in government, I worked in an office. I was the only African American there, and in a professional position. Let me say that much. So after the first year, there was a guy who we came in at the same time, and he got promoted to the next GS level. And so I thought, wow, I work harder than him. I come earlier, I stay later. My boss has commended me on, our boss has commended me on so many things I've done. And so for another year after that, I still sort of was like, I just got to work harder. I've got to work harder, because if I work harder, then, that boss will then give me the promotion, the same promotion that he gave, that guy. And so a year went by. So now I'm like 2 years behind, right? And I finally, from a place of hurt rather than sort of a place of, confidence and power, I said to my boss, what do I have to do? I don't understand why you haven't given me my promotion to the next level. I'm sitting there almost in tears, like, what do I have to do? And he looked at me and he said, Flora, you never asked me.
Ooh.
Just like that. He said, you never asked me. And that week, he put in my paperwork for my promotion. So here's my point. You don't have to be haughty. You don't have to be rude or any of that. But you do have to be willing to know, this is what I want. This is what I think I deserve. And then with confidence, not like teary-eyed and, but with confidence, you need to go in and you need to sit with the person who can give that to you, whatever it is, and you need to ask for it. So I'm just saying to all you young people out there, especially women, go in, ask for what you want, but make sure you deserve it now. Make sure you've worked hard, you've done your homework, you brought your A game, but go out there and ask for what you want. And I'll admit, even today, I still have some hesitancy about asking for what I think I deserve and want. But, again,
If you don't ask, you
never
don't
too
get.
late. Yeah, pardon me?
If you don't ask, you don't get. It's like playing the lottery. You got to buy a ticket. in order
Right.
to win.
Or as my friend says, if you don't ask, the only answer you can get is no.
So true. And oftentimes in this, I talk about this in the book, that we are often the first person to say no to ourselves, and we stop ourselves from getting to the next level because we've already done the answer.
Yeah.
And so say yes to yourself first, go and ask. And
Exactly.
I think that's apparent and true in every single way. And we're coming up on time. This is the last question, and it comes from someone anonymous. So I don't know who asked it, but whoever asked it, thank you for asking it. This person asked, Black women have been left out often by non-Black women. Do you find it true in regards to this new wave of making room for women in high-ranking corporate positions? So thinking about who is around the table, and that's something that when we talk about women around the table or people that are different than ourselves around the table, that's great if you have some different folks around the table, but the real question is, how do we ask who isn't at the table and how do we get them there? And I think that's what this person is trying to ask about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just a couple things on that. One is, first, there has to be the commitment, to having that kind of diversity at the table. There has to be a real commitment to it. It can't just be, talk. There has to be action. And one of the things that they have found is that if you hold managers accountable for it, you get a very different result than if you just ask them and tell them that this would be a nice thing to do. This would be a good thing for us to do. Let's bring more women to the table. Let's treat African-American women, men, people of color with the respect that they're due. It's very interesting. As soon as managers, especially in large corporations, but this applies even in the smallest of organizations. But as soon as managers are rated themselves in terms of whether they have been effective, whether they have performed on the basis of who they brought to the table, who they promoted, when they're rated on that basis, then all of a sudden, what you have is the goal and the vision aligning with action, or action aligning with the vision. And so what I would say is that to the person who asked that, very good question, is that we have to make sure that people are, that first they have the commitment and the vision. And we hear of different companies, especially since the George Floyd and all the other incidents that have, come to play, but especially that one. We've heard a lot of folks saying, yes, we have to have, more equality. We have to have more equity. We have to have more diversity. We have to have more women at the table. We have to have more people of color at the table. But now the test will be accountability. Will the boards of directors reflect that? Will senior positions in the C-suite reflect that? Will organizations that have the opportunity to promote people of color and women into leadership positions, will that happen? And that's really the key. We have to be held accountable. We have to have our actions align with our values and our vision. And so, that's it. I just want to say, for Corporate Council on Africa, we're not perfect, but we certainly are trying to do that. I have a great board that is very diverse: women, men, Africans. We have a lot of people there. Our staff is diverse. I thank them for all the incredible work they do. And they will whip me if I do not mention clearly before I get off that we would love everyone to come to our US Africa Business Summit. It's our signature event. It is going to be incredible. It will be in Marrakesh, Morocco, July 19th to 22nd. I hope to see all of you who are here today at the table, the seat at this table. Come and meet us in Marrakesh, Morocco, and join me and CCA and so many other folks who appreciate all that Susan and others are saying about a seat at the table. We've got to get the women there, and we look forward to seeing all of you there. Men too, you can come also.
Everyone can come to Morocco. I highly recommend we all go. I'd like to be there. So if you want to see Flory, next up, it's Morocco, guys.
Absolutely.
Flory, thank you so much for this conversation. And a special thank you to the World Trade Center in Washington, D.C. and Dublin, and to all of you, our audience, for joining us today. And if you missed a part of the program, that's okay. Have no fear. It'll be up on YouTube at the Ronald Reagan channel. And all of you, mark your calendars. April 26th is our next installment of Seat at the Table. And I'll be talking with Marjorie Krause, the founder and chairman of APCO Worldwide, one of the integral policy and PR companies. And you probably know Marjorie, Flory, so it's going to be a good conversation. Let's continue this conversation online, everyone. So please use the hashtag Seat at the Table and the other hashtag Where Leaders Lead. To all of you, thank you. Have a great rest of your day. I'm Susan Sloan, and you have a seat at the table.